So I'm now welcome my, my panel group on.
Thanks for the introduction. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Heather Clancy. I am with GreenBiz, and what we're going to do is probe into some of the ideas that Jason was just introducing. We are joined, thank you very much, by Beth Heider from Skanska. She's the Chief Sustainability Officer there, and apparently these two have known each other a while, so hopefully they can have fun together. But when we were prepping for this panel, we were talking about Houston. And since then, we've got the whole mess in Florida. And now we've got Maria coming up the coast and Puerto Rico and who knows where. I don't know. I haven't been on the news today. But
Puerto Rico, yeah.
Right. So I guess the question I have is, you know, these regenerative or these living buildings, right? These buildings that can adapt and flex with what's going on. How would one of them have prevailed in a storm like that? Like, how would they have acted differently than, I mean, maybe they would have been partially destroyed, but what would have been different?
We don't have the same scale yet in living buildings,
right.
But one of the projects that I'd like to talk about, because it's such a fabulous project, and it also is really a nice segue from John's comments earlier about, you know, better living through science education. And my mother was a earth science teacher, so I'm sure that she's smiling down from heaven today. Is the Brock Center, which is the environmental center of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And Jason and I worked on the Eco Charrette. Skanska was the owner's agent on that project. The designer was Greg Mella and Smith Group, and they did a fabulous job. It was an amazing team. But Jason challenged us during the in many ways, during the Eco Charrette.
I'm a problem child.
You're a problem child. And the challenge was not how we could do less bad, but how the building itself could actually heal the insults to the site, right, that had happened in the past. Immense population development on one edge of the site, and then on the insults to the lower edge of the site were all, you know, thanks to the Army Corps of Engineers, doing what they thought was right at the time. And I think that the building has done a really nice job of actually achieving that and responding to that challenge.
How?
So today, it floats lightly above the site. It managed to prevail in a major storm surge last year, and while so doing, generated, for the course of the year, almost double the energy that it needed to meet its own needs and generate water that captured it and purified it. That actually, it's the only living building, and Amanda will correct my math later, I think it's the only living building in the US where you can actually drink the water.
On the commercial side, yes, correct, yeah.
So, you know, it's managed to prevail. The other sort of story that we were talking about earlier, which Jason particularly likes because he loves beer, is that they've actually collected so much water on the roof that they've taken 600 gallons of it down the road to the Pleasure Point Brewery, and they're brewing it into rain barrel beer. So the point is that you can not just survive, you can also thrive. And I think that if we begin to look at buildings as ways to prevail in hurricane events or any kind of major climate events, then, you know, we're looking at it from a regenerative perspective and not just a survival perspective.
So I imagine one of the things that you've probably debated in the years is economics, right? So that project, you know, how did that pencil out vis-a-vis the traditional or the understood approach?
Well, we've done actually, ironically, Skanska and the Institute, you know, on a few occasions have done financial analysis of living buildings together.
Yeah.
So it's actually been something that we very actively have talked about. And you know, the surprising thing, even, you know, almost a decade ago now, was that the economics were fairly decent. They weren't great initially, but they were fairly decent, and it depended upon the size of the building and the building type. But what's happened in the ensuing years, of course, solar has changed dramatically the economics, but just about everything, the availability of materials, the knowledge, It's a very different conversation now than it was.
And I think that we're shifting the conversation too from initial cost to life cycle performance. And I think that's a really important thing for us to do, because the study demonstrated that, yeah, you would pay a significant amount in the double digits for a living hospital in Boston, but the payback was 11 years. And the hospital isn't going to rebuild that building in 11 years. So if we begin to change that argument and
So how
ask
do you
the question not from cost, but from value.
So how do you get the person that's going to build that thinking differently? I mean, you've got to shift that mindset.
Well, we talked about this actually. There was a wonderful panel that Verge put on this morning around healthy and adaptive buildings. And one of the discussions was this very thing, that if you want to help any client make a shift, you have to understand what their motivations are and what things are important to them. And there is an economic story always that's there. It may be the productivity of their employees, it may be competitiveness of employees, sort of wanting to make sure that they're staying competitive with the best talent. It could be health and wellness, which is a big thing. I'm glad to see Well is here at the event. You know, whatever the issue is, there's a path to get people to understand that building better buildings that are more resilient, that are healthier to be in, that maybe never have energy and water bills, which is a great thing operationally, that is a great economic proposition, but you have to understand the gateway or the pathway to helping people understand, you know, that it's the right time now.
Yeah, and Heather, I think that, you know, when you start to have financial institutions valuing buildings based on value and not just initial cost, you get the attorneys and the insurance companies involved. Now you have a real dogfight, right? And I think that calculus is beginning to change, and certainly on the commercial side, we're seeing that valuations and investment money is asking the question of how green is this building and how do you prove that it is?
You know, Jason, you mentioned solar a couple of times. What other technologies are integral for scaling this, right? Because that's what we need to do, is scale this. It can't be just one building at a time.
Well, there's been all sorts of innovations. First of all, lighting has, of course, been a big change in just the last few years. Batteries, you know, even things as simple as induction cooktops, which reduce energy use but are much better to cook on than other alternatives, in my opinion. The fact is that most of the technologies are in fact technologies. They are not sort of fuel. They're not the old Victorian era way of doing something, whether it's cooking a burger or whether it's, you know, turning on your heat. We're moving to an age where Moore's law is starting to govern the rate of change in innovation in building systems, as opposed to decades of resistance.
So what does that require from Skanska? I mean, that's a different way of thinking, or is it?
Well, I think that, again, you know, I think, again, sort of mirroring what John observed earlier, we have a lot of great technology, and there's a lot of technology that's being developed out there. I think that the bigger challenge is the human challenge, and it's getting folks to, again, pivot from that initial cost to the life cycle perspective. And I think that what we really need here is bold leadership. And another project that Jason is aware of, because we're looking at PEDAL certification for net zero energy. Actually, we like to, on a positive front, say net positive energy, is the American Geophysical Union. The American Geophysical Union is an organization of scientists. You don't have to explain climate change to them. They get it. And curiously enough, right after the last election, they were voting on whether or not they were going to go all the way to net zero on the renovation of their headquarters offices in Washington, D.C., and they doubled down on it. And so what we're doing there is we're doing, and I'm doing this because it, like Bullitt Center, it has this beautiful crown of solar panels, building an urban retrofit that will be net positive energy. And it's part of their mission, so it ties to the mission. But the return on that investment was accepted by the organization. So they are making the upfront investment to take advantage.
So one quick last question, you know, and this came up during the discussion about that building. it's easy to wait. Oh, this new technology is coming, this new technology is coming, this is going to come, this is coming. How do you get people moving forward without the fear, get them beyond the fear of obsolescence? So like, what do you do to get someone to sign that dotted line and get going?
No
Both
time
of you.
like
This
the present.
Yeah, there's no time like, but I mean, it's important to have motivated clients where it aligns with their mission. And then once you prove that it's possible, like at the Bullitt Center, like we fully intend to do at AGU, you can't unring that bell. And then you can begin to look at opportunities to scale and move beyond. But you have to have the first brave leaders in order to encourage the first followers.
Right, that is a great note of hope to end this conversation on. I thank you so much.
Thank
It
you.
feels like I could sit here for another 10 minutes, and I'm sure they'd be
Only
really
10?
angry at me behind stage. But please thank Jason and Beth.